Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Rookie Card Collector 123 video. In today's episode, we're going to continue our look at my road to 310, how I assembled the most diverse baseball Hall of Fame rookies collection of all time on a budget. Continuing in with the series, we're going to look at 3 or 4 more players today. Look at the initial rookie items that I purchased for them back when I started the collection around 2004. And moving forward, how I made upgrades and changes to each player's collectibles over the course of the 10 years to my final rookie representation in 2014 when I sold off the collection. So the first player we're going to look at today is probably the biggest baseball player to collect, not only pre-war but all time, Babe Ruth. And there's going to be some interesting stories to tell about my attempt to acquire the best Babe Ruth, or the earliest Babe Ruth item I was able to. So going back to the very beginning, as I mentioned several times, my first year or so, I was able to assemble all the post-war Hall of Famers rookie cards, with the Eddie Matthews being the final one and also being the most expensive one, the 52 Topps high number. So shortly after that, I started looking at the pre-war guys, and many of them I started picking up either 33 Gaudis or T206s. Those were the easiest ones to find, especially at card shows and all, which was a source of most of my pickups, and also some on eBay. But anyway, so I'm starting to look at Babe Ruth, and back then the Sporting News, which was considered his primary rookie card from 1916, also known as M101-5 or M101-4. Both of those issues were produced in 1916. The -4 would be produced first, and then several months later, the -5 series was produced by Felix Mendelssohn. So even back then, I was starting to say at that time, a decent condition Ruth rookie was probably around 20,000 or so, somewhere in there. And of course, nicer examples would go up from there. So I couldn't afford anything close to that. And so I looked at some other Babe Ruth options. And one of my good friends in the hobby back then, when I was living in New Jersey, I think he was living in Connecticut, but he used to come to all the tri-state shows, the White Plains show in New York, um, the Hofstra University show, the Giant Stadium show in New Jersey at the Meadowlands. And many serious collectors probably would recognize the name Joe Tomasulo. Joe and I sat and talked at many shows, either at his table or our friend Chuck, who always set up at the big shows in the tri-state area. And we would talk about pre-war top cards, W600s, and Bryce Williams cards, and rookie cards of Hall of Famers, and all that kind of stuff. And one day we're talking, and I told him, I'm on the lookout for a Babe Ruth right now, to represent my rookie collection. And he told me he has a Collins McCarthy Ruth. And back then, the holder from PSA, they said 1916 for the Collins McCarthy cards, as well as the Boston Store, the Standard Biscuit, and the Wheel Baking. I guess when those sets were initially cataloged, they were cataloged as 1916, and then further updated later on to 1917. So with the 1916 label, the Collins McCarthy appeared to me to be very similar as far as desirability to the 16 Sporting News Babe Ruth. They both showing 1916 as the year of issue. But I was aware, I think, at that point that there was more information out there saying that it was a 17 issue. So I was not misinformed or anything. I knew it was a 19. I knew it was not the real Babe Ruth rookie, but probably as close as I would get. So we worked out a deal, long story short, and I bought the Collins McCarthy Babe Ruth. It was a PSA 2. It was a pretty nice example from Joe at the next time I saw him at the White Plains card show, and picked that up. And this is probably 2006, 2007, somewhere around there. And the money I spent on that was way more than I spent on the Eddie Matthews. And by far, at that point, that was the most money I spent for any of my Hall of Fame rookie collectibles. But it was Babe Ruth, and I figured, I wanted to have a really nice example to represent Ruth in the collection. So I was okay with that, and Joe gave me a very fair price. So I had that Ruth in the collection probably about 3 years or so, and not really any intention of selling it. A couple of times the big head strip card of Ruth came up in auction. I think in a hunt auction it came up where I went to attend the auction in person. I ended up picking up a couple of other cards from that set that day at the auction, but the Babe Ruth I did not. Even the strip cards of Ruth like that sold for a lot of money. And the big head strip cards, when I was looking for the Ruth, they were cataloged at that time as 1916 to 20, being produced sometime during those 5 years. And of course, 1916 being the first year of that time span matched the Sporting News rookie year. So again, to me, I kind of realized it might not be a Babe Ruth rookie, in terms of what the Sporting News was, but again, maybe the closest I was going to be able to get. And like I said, unfortunately, I was never able to pick up one of those big head strip cards of Ruth. So I had the Collins McCarthy. Now we're about 2009, 2008, 2009, and I'm looking through a Leland's auction catalog that came in the mail one day. And I come across early in the auction. Usually they put the top items up front toward the beginning of the auction. So early in the catalog, I come across a few different Boston Red Sox spring training postcards, real photo postcards, probably one of a kind. They didn't appear like they were commercially printed. They were, like I said, real photographs. And they were described by Leland as being spring training 1915 in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And one of the players on there was Babe Ruth, and his postcard was a full length pose, a full body shot of him on the mound. And you could tell it was not a major league stadium. That's where the spring training, Hot Springs, Arkansas, I believe, entered the picture. So, quickly checking the date on that being 1915, and my Collins McCarthy, even if you went by the label, which was not correct, it was 1916. And the real Collins McCarthy date was 1917. At that point, that was pretty clear. So Babe Ruth 2 years earlier definitely piqued my interest, and it was hopefully going to go for a lot cheaper than the Sporting News, which by that time had started to escalate. It was not really in the 20,000 range anymore. It was probably more like double that price. So I bid in the Leland's auction, and I was fortunate enough to win that postcard. And these were all raw, the postcards. For the most part, the grading companies, unless something was cataloged in the standard catalog of vintage baseball cards or the American card catalog, for the most part, the grading companies didn't grade them. They didn't encapsulate them. And if they did, they put the labeling as very vague, I would say. They very rarely identified if it was a team postcard. They very rarely identified any individuals that were pictured as part of the team. Anything where there was some sort of a risk being taken by the grading company by putting their neck on the line, saying that this is this or this is that, and it turns out to be wrong, they don't want to be accountable for that situation. So the easiest way to avoid it is just don't do it. So it was very difficult back then to get them to agree to grade anything uncatalogued. But anyway, I lived very close to SGC. They were in New Jersey at that time in Parsippany, and I lived about a half hour from there, and I also worked about a half hour from there. So one day I was at my job, and fortunately I was in a management role, and I kind of had free reign to do as I pleased, more or less, over the course of the day, as long as I generated business for the company. They weren't too particular about, my whereabouts every minute of the day. So, various times I would bring cards up to SGC on my lunch hour, which probably ended up being more like a lunch 2 or 3 hours. But so I bring this Babe Ruth up there one morning, lunchtime, and I'd show it to the graders. And I had prepared documentation and pictures showing the other Leland slots from the auction and what the uniforms of the Red Sox look like and the various years during that time frame, like 1914, 1915, 1916, 1917. And I was able to put together enough proof and enough documentation that SGC agreed to label the Babe Ruth postcard as a circa 1915 Babe Ruth real photo postcard. And it actually graded an SGC 50, which at that time was equivalent to a 4. And for a postcard grade, that's quite a high grade. Very rarely do postcards grade much above a 1 or a 2 or so. And this was not postally used, obviously. So they agreed to grade it. I went and got lunch. I came back. The card was done. I brought it back home with me, brought it back to work with me. And I had my Babe Ruth 1915, maybe call it a pre-rookie, I guess, because the Sporting News, being the true rookie card, was 1916. So I had something a year earlier. And of course, I was aware all the time that there was a Baltimore News Ruth. But even back then, that was a six-figure. It had grown into a six-figure card. Nowhere near what it is today, but still. At the time where the Sporting News was selling for 20, that was already over 100,000. So I obviously was never going to be able to afford that one. So I had my Babe Ruth 1915 and never really expected to ever upgrade that. And again, for me, as I mentioned in past videos several times, upgrade was not either condition or value or anything in my eyes. An upgrade was anything earlier than the item that I had already. So one day I'm looking at eBay, and I always kept checking for Babe Ruth items, especially 1914, which would be earlier than mine. And just in the chance that maybe somebody's selling the Baltimore News, cheap enough that I can have a shot at it. So one day I'm looking at eBay 1914, doing my Babe Ruth search, and somebody posted, not the Baltimore News card, but they posted a Baltimore Sun. It was a full newspaper, and on the cover of the newspaper, the lead story was Babe Ruth signs contract with the Baltimore Orioles. And there's a team picture on the cover with Babe Ruth, obviously, clearly pictured in the photo. And that was dated, I think it was April 8th, 1914. Which probably predated the Baltimore News card anyway. So, and the seller wanted, it was cheap. It was like $400, I think, relatively cheap. So I had to make a tough choice. I had to either keep my postcard and continue move along, or I could buy that. And by now, the price I paid for the postcard had definitely appreciated. Maybe I figured maybe about double what I paid for it. And I can free up a real nice chunk of money if I was able to sell the postcard and just keep that Baltimore News newspaper representation. But then again, the other thing I had to consider was back at this time, I was still working under the premise that every single item in my collection I wanted to have graded. And you couldn't really grade a full newspaper. So, so before I bought that, I reached out to Beckett, who I was friendly with the lead graders over there at that time, Mark Anderson and Andy Broom, and they were grading a lot of stuff for me that was kind of off the beaten path, and things that they may not normally accept for submission. But I always provided the documentation. They could never be accused of doing anything, that was wrong or inaccurate or something. It's just sometimes the stuff I gave them to encapsulate was, not really the norm. So I asked them if I trim out this Babe Ruth article with the team photo and all from the 1914 newspaper, and it had the newspaper heading and everything with the date and all at the very top. If it fits in your largest holder, can you guys put that in a holder for me and just label it 1914 Baltimore Sun, um, Babe Ruth or something like that, and just label it authentic? Obviously, they're not going to give it a number grade. So they were fine with that. And so I decided to go ahead. I bought that newspaper. I submitted it to Beckett, got it in the holder, graded, and subsequently sold the postcard, which did end up selling for a little less than double what I paid for it a couple of years earlier, which at the time, I was pretty pleased with. The sad thing is, and I know we all have these stories, and you'll drive yourself crazy if you spend too much time dwelling on it. But the same Babe Ruth postcard, 2023 or 2024, I think it was in a Mile High auction. And I don't think it had come up for sale since then, since I sold mine up until 2023, and it sold for 152,000 and change. And I know recently there ended up being a second example of that exact image from that postcard. And the second example recently sold in a heritage auction, I think, for 168,000 or something like that, or 142,000. And I won't mention what I paid for mine or what I sold it for, but it's many, many, many times lower than that. So, of course, it's one of those things. I wish I had it back. I wish I never sold it, but it is what it is. Life goes on, and I had my Baltimore Sun 1914 Ruth newspaper, so that would be my final Ruth representation in the collection. So it's kind of the highs and lows. The Collins McCarthy that I had picked up early on in the collection of Ruth also would be a 100,000 plus card today. The postcard obviously was well over $100,000 today. And I ended up keeping a Baltimore Sun newspaper clipping and a Beckett holder. So probably didn't make didn't make some of the wisest decisions there, but it was a lot of fun pursuing the earliest Babe Ruth item anyway. All right, well that story took quite a while. So the next player we're going to look at is Red Schoendienst. Probably not quite as exciting as Babe Ruth, but another guy who's in the Hall of Fame, so I needed him in my rookie collection. So Schoendienst's mainstream rookie card is pretty easy to come by. He's in the 48 Bowman, the black and white set. So back in 2004, when I started the collection, I quickly was able to pick up one of those. And in low grade condition, it probably only set me back about $40 or so. So I had the Schoendienst rookie, I had that for a while. And as I got a few years later, I started to look to change out of all the mainstream Topps and Bowman rookies that I had and switch those over to something more challenging. So doing some research, I found that the earliest Schoendienst card was 2 years earlier than the 48 Bowman. So he appeared it was a team postcard set. It was not produced by the team though. He was on the St. Louis Cardinals, and this is 1946. It was produced by Sears, the same Sears department store that was prominent in American culture all the way up until recently when they filed for bankruptcy. But the Sears department stores in 46, they produced a postcard set that was about 20 St. Louis players. And they did not only the Cardinals, but the St. Louis also had an American League counterpart, the St. Louis Browns. And they produced a Browns team postcard issue as well. So both of them had around 20 cards in there. And the Schoendienst was 2 years earlier than the 48 Bowman. So I was after that. And I was looking on eBay for years and never found one. Never found one in an auction catalog. Never found one anywhere. But one day I'm doing my eBay searches and I come across a Schoendienst Sears postcard on eBay, and it was pretty decent condition. And at the time, I thought I was overspending. I think I paid maybe $300 for it, and I sold my Bowman. I had that one. I got it graded and kept that for a couple more years. And I had several inquiries. People wanted to buy it from me after I bought it, so I had a chance to make probably a decent amount of money. But I wouldn't sell anything in the collection because then I would have to replace it again. So unless I upgraded, then I would sell the item that I had previously. So I kept the Schoendienst, and like I said, a couple of years later, I started to look at more and more of the baseball magazine premiums. Baseball magazine started all the way back around 1910 or so, and put out a publication I think it was every month. It might have been more often than that at some points. And along with the publication, they had a mail away offer where you can get premiums. Premiums were oversized, like posters almost, but they were like 8.5 by 11 or something like that, or 10 by 13. They were not posters like full size posters, but they were obviously much larger than cards. So there was a bunch of those baseball magazine premiums beginning in 1910, all the way through I think 1957 maybe. I'm not sure when it ended exactly. But Schoendienst was on a premium, and it was first released in 1945, so that was 1 year earlier than my Sears postcard. And they were very reasonable. Well, I think the Schoendienst, I ended up finding one, and I ended up paying probably $30 for it. I think I got it for even less than the Bowman rookie when I bought that. So I picked up the Schoendienst M114. That was the American Card Catalog designation for those premiums, and I kept that. That was my final red Schoendienst representation in the collection. I sold the Sears postcard, and up until today, that was the only example of the Sears postcard of Schoendienst I ever came across. I was also looking, there was a Musial rookie 46 in that same postcard set from Sears it was in the catalog, it was in the card catalog. I never saw it. And then after I sold off the whole collection, one day I was doing some research and I came across an old auction catalog from like 2005. I think it was Mastronet, and they had the Musial Sears postcard in there up for sale back then. 20 years ago now, and whatever it's sold for, I don't even know. But apparently, there's two of the Musial postcards out there, as far as I know. But I never found the Musial. But I was going to try to cover another player or two today. The Babe Ruth story kind of went sort of long, so I'm going to cut off the video here so we don't get too long. And I'll pick up again next time with the next major Hall of Famer in my collection during the road to 310. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Have a great day, and I'll catch you guys again on the next one.